Joe, the premier matchup of the weekend, Ohio State versus Oregon. I think a lot of people, Joe, want to know, is Oregon legit and is Ohio State legit? Look, Ohio State has a very good foundation of guys that they have recruited through high school, and they've built through that. Jeremiah Smith is obviously the one that you can look at and say that about. But, Joe, they also added some really talented pieces. Look, this is what I was going to tell you earlier that I thought that you were going to really get on me about. Will Howard has been really good, man.
I completely disagree with that statement. You're 100% right. I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that he's been really good?
I think that the way that he played against Iowa was kind of indicative of the fact that of what I said in the offseason is very true. I mean, how many times did he throw to covered? I don't mean to cut you off already, but how many times did he throw to covered receivers? He threw an interception in this game.
Joe Burrow in 2019 when they went
off. He's not Joe Burrow.
Okay, but if you have a freak of nature or man-on-man coverage like Jeremiah Smith, they're always open. Joe, I mean, I'm not trying to be rude with you, but you compared an Iowa defense last week to being a really solid defense that was going to test them at moments. Okay, well, if that's true, he went 21 of 25 for 209 yards. He scored 5 total touchdowns, 4 through the air. I mean, he went off. What are we discussing about? He looked – I get what you're saying. Yeah, he's throwing it to cover receivers. Jeremiah Smith is a freak show. A Mecca freak show.
Okay. Look, this is my whole thing with Will Howard. And the whole thing that I said during the offseason, by the way, Ohio State fans, before you get mad at me, I have a whole spiel on why I think pretty confidently that you're going to win. But my whole thing with him is that he wasn't an upgrade over Kyle McCord. And Kyle McCord's playing great football for Syracuse right now. And you've got a guy who, again, he is throwing
receivers, bud.
He has weaker receivers. Kyle McCord now has weaker receivers at Syracuse, and he's putting up great production. He willed his team back against UNLV. He 100% deserves the credit that he is against UNLV. He's playing great football. Will Howard, on the other hand, again, I'm watching him throw to covered receivers. He's throwing into tight coverage. Because of the guys that he's throwing to, he's able to get bailed out 100% of the time. I'm not saying that he's horrible. I'm not saying that he's bad. That's not what I'm saying. But it goes back to my whole take this whole offseason. I think Will Howard is slightly above average. And if you listen to anybody else talk on any other shows, they've said mostly the same thing.
I don't care what they say because I can defend the point that there's
I watched the all 22. I watched the tape. I think he is fine. I think he makes some good decisions. He's a big, strong athlete. They use him, incorporate him great in the run game.
What do you think of Iowa's defense?
I think that it's good, but I don't think that look, I said that it was one of the better defenses in the Big Ten. It was a good defense. It was going to be a good barometer for how good Will Howard is.
Okay, well then how are you going to come out here the next week when the guy had 5 total touchdowns and say that he didn't make some elite? I could also make the argument that the coverage that you're talking about is an elite throw by him that he's put it in a place that nobody else can catch it. But his receiver that he knows he's a freak. See, this is what y'all do. And
no. Okay,
I'm going to be real with you. This is why I think that they're going to go into Oregon and win. I've seen him in tight coverage make the throws and trust the receiver when they're there.
I'm referring to the fact, and look, he had 21. He was 21 for 25 in this game. He does have a lot of open receivers that he connects to. I just don't love some of the decisions that he makes, and the interception that he threw was pretty brutal. And now I want to move on to talking about why I think Ohio State is going. I want to move on to talk about why I think that Ohio State is going to win this football game. I feel very confident in the skill players that Ohio State has. Extremely confident. More importantly, I feel very, very confident in how good Ohio State's defense is. Tyleik Williams, that whole front seven, has been eating up everybody that they've gone against, and they were all over Iowa's offense. And I know that it's an Iowa offense. If you want to downplay it, they still kicked the crap out of that Iowa offensive line. They are so good on defense. They are statistically one of the best in the country in sacks produced, tackles for loss produced. They are so good. And my whole thing with Will Howard is that Will Howard doesn't need to be a top 10 quarterback. He doesn't, because there are so many tremendous athletes at receiver, at tight end, at running back. They're able to be diverse in their decision-making and their play calls because of every single guy that they can turn to. So he can go for 209 yards and throw a pick, and they can still win by almost 30 points. because of how good this roster is. And I compare that to Oregon right now, who frankly still feels a little bit erratic. Like I feel like that they are gifted and they've got good athletes, but they're not in a steady pace the same way that Ohio State is. I think there's more of a separation than the outcomes of these games would indicate.
Yeah, and look, it's, we think that Oregon's been tested because they went up against Boise State. They had to kick a field goal there at the end to win. I mean, I don't really know if they've necessarily been tested like this either. They haven't gone against a top 10 opponent like some teams have, but neither has Ohio State. And Joe, I got to be real with you. To this point, I think we're going to find out a lot about both teams because Iowa just doesn't have a pulse. I mean, like, I know that they might.
They're a quality team.
No, they're 122nd in the country in total offense. No, they don't have a pulse offensively. Sorry.
They don't have a pulse offensively, but they're a quality team, which is why it's fine to use that Iowa game as evidence for how good Ohio State is. This is all I'm saying.
I'm not going to go that far because this Oregon team has better. I mean, Joe, they don't have. I'm not going to continue to go down that game. That's why we should have just broken it down last night. But I mean, look, Oregon has a big issue in running the football. Again, I understand that last week James went off. But, Joe, there have been injuries that they are getting guys back from, and I get that. They're still a 67th in the country in rushing offense against one right now is one of the best front sevens that in the country. Like, I think that you just talked about it. Like, that D-line, that front seven for Ohio State has been more than high caliber. But I don't know if they've been tested. So even though I look at Oregon and say maybe in the early part of the season you had struggles running the football, Joe, I don't know if there's anybody that they've seen yet that maybe that we can compare to. Dylan Gabriel's a serviceable quarterback here. I mean, he's going to put you in right positions. But to your point, they're so erratic. They're so erratic in what they're doing. And I think that this game being at night in Eugene is going to give them an edge. But I feel
it's technically not a night because it's a 7:30 kick. So I don't mean
5:30.
No,
it's 5:30 West Coast. If it's
no,
6:30 or 4:30.
It's 7:30 Eastern time, so it's 4:30. So just to correct you, but just before anyone comments that we're
okay. Well, Pacific people, your time zone's stupid. All right, regardless.
Okay.
In this situation, I agree with you. I think that Ohio State's just going to be too much. I do think that their running game's going to struggle against Ohio State.
That's the biggest point for me is that watching the success that especially the interior pass rush and the interior run defense for Ohio State, the success that they were able to have against Iowa and the success they've had this season. I mean, there's just so many future NFLers on that Ohio State defense. One thing that we've talked about with Oregon, and I know that their offensive line has been slowly improving. I don't know if it's improved enough in the interior for me to feel good coming into this game. Jordan James is a great back. He played great against Michigan State. If they can get him out in space and they can mostly rely on outside runs, maybe they can spark some things. But it is going to be really tough sledding trying to produce in the interior based on what's been put on film so far by Ohio State. I feel pretty confident about this. I feel very, very confident that Ohio State is going to beat Oregon. I'm sure that one's going to get pulled by somebody after I get proven wrong and something crazy happens in this game. But from what I've seen, I see a much more consistent Ohio State team that has so many premier players at their offensive skill positions and then on defense at all the important spots, especially in their front seven.
I have questions about Ohio State. Like, look, Oregon's defense is not a complete pushover either. Now,
no, absolutely not. Their defensive line is not just as good, but is also very, very good.
I mean, the last time that they faced a running game like this, however, Genty went off. I mean, and you have Henderson, you have Quinshon Judkins.
Right.
I'm interested to see how the reverse happens. How does Ohio State run the football against Oregon? And I think that their defense, for what it's worth, can slow Ohio State down enough, okay, to keep them relatively in the game early. But I'm going to throw this out at you from an Oregon perspective. Joe, the last time that we said about a game that we felt might be a little bit more lopsided, why do I keep in the back of my mind remembering that Dillon Gabriel went off against a playoff-led Texas team last year? His ability in big games, when he's been in these situations, he's taken off and he's used his legs. He has overperformed what people think of him as a quarterback. And when you're able to get first down with your legs, which we saw him do against a talented front seven last year in Texas, why does something in the back of my mind say, hey, man, Dillon Gabriel has not been a slouch in these high-profile games either?
Yeah, he's always somebody who's stepped up to the occasion, but I mean, at the same time, in some ways, he's faltered. So for every Texas game, there's also the Oklahoma State game, the Kansas game, where Oklahoma didn't play that great. I know it's not on all on him. I'm not saying he played abysmally, but like he does have some great performances. I also think to talk more about like how Oregon's offense matches up here. One thing that this offense is built and designed on, it's getting playmakers the ball in space and allowing them to create.
Yep. Tez Johnson is the poster child of that.
As much as Dillon Gabriel could have a big game and he could be able to set his guys up for that, one thing that really stood out to me from Ohio State, Blake, was how much they rally and they tackle. They come downhill. They don't allow anything after the catch. Like, I really wonder if that's the separation point. Like, early on in the Iowa game, it felt like there were some early, like, not big gains, but like they were moving the chains like a little bit more than you would have anticipated based on what the final score was. But after so many drives of getting stopped right after they caught the ball or right after guys got past the line of scrimmage, it just grinded them down, and then their offense completely got shut down. So like, that's another thing here.
Oh, sorry. Let me be a counter, or let me play devil's advocate, as the old saying goes. Okay. Have they faced a receiver core this good?
Well, that's true. Iowa's receiving core is not to the degree of for very wide margin of Oregon. So that's a very strong point. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.
So, I mean, look, I get what you're saying about their DBs. I look at them, though. Okay, pass defense, they're fourth in the country in total in passing yards allowed. They haven't given up much. I don't think that they face anybody remotely close that can stress them either.
Yes. So big find out moment here.
You talk about there being the separation point, and it very well may be. I'm not saying that it's not. Their secondary with Caleb Downs, all those guys, fantastic. You haven't also played a defense that can kind of go somewhat vertical on you too. Like, look, man, Terrence Ferguson had 2 catches, 82 yards last week. He is their explosive playmaker when it comes to get the ball, get downfield, get the ball, get downfield. Tez Johnson had 10 catches last week, Joe, for 84 yards. And I look at him, okay, you better be able to tackle in space, because if you don't, you are in trouble on him, man. That kid is one cut up the field, and he's going to get 7 on you. And before you know it, you're midway through the third quarter, and he's got 7 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown. You're like, Jesus Christ. How many times can we tackle this dude? I get what you're saying on that. The thing that's interesting for me with Ohio State, offensively, I think that they're going to be fine. It's the opposite side of the things that, Joe, there's just nobody that's tested them yet that I can be like, all right, well, everything that we thought about you going into the season in this defense was 100% correct. And this is what I also think, too. I think of this in the back of my mind also. What has this season taught us? That everything that we thought about in a position group going into the season, at some point or another, has been proven to be false. Right? Look at how many position groups that we've looked at. Oh, man, Ole Miss and that wide receiver core, they're going to go off. Oh, man, Georgia, year 2 under Carson Beck, they've had a downfall. There have been in these high-profile games, Vandy, over Bama, Arkansas, over Tennessee. I know that's one conference, but all I am saying here is I need to see you also do it too.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but like at the same time, I think we're kind of deep enough into the season now where we have a little bit better of an idea, and kind of all the predetermined notions that we had in the preseason, like they're kind of all tucked away. We're going off of what we've seen halfway point through the season. I know what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I understand. I'm just elaborating a little bit, but there. But to your point though, I 100% agree that like this is a real testing point for this Ohio State defense and this secondary, because you're right, they haven't faced anyone this talented yet. They haven't, and Ohio State fans can't sit here and disagree with that, because you've had a Michigan-esque schedule to this point, the Michigan one from last year, where you had a million weeks to warm up, and then you get an Iowa team that doesn't really have much of an offense, so of course you're going to blow past them. Still taught us some things. I will say, though, and where I'm giving them credit here, having watched them on film and not just the broadcast, the way that they were tackling and the way that they were coming downfield, the way that they were reacting, to me was extremely, extremely positive. It would at least indicate that they're going to do a good job of that against Oregon. Things could go in the opposite direction, but I at least feel good about that in the demeanor that they were approaching, not allowing any yards after catches.
I'm with you. I understand that, but so is Oregon. Look, here's what I feel. Or this is to wrap my thoughts about this game on Monday and above. I think Ohio State may be the best team in the country. If not one, they're two. But I don't know that if anybody's been able to test them enough for me to come out here and say, hey, all right, now my beliefs of you are true. Because, again, Joe Marshall has the best receiving core, arguably, that they've seen. And I'm like, yeah, that's not what you're going to see Saturday. In reference to Oregon, look, man, when are you not going to be erratic? Now, you weren't necessarily erratic last week, but you played a bad football team. So we'll see.
Well, that's what's – I know there's a couple of super chats, but like to that point, and it's one of these things where, and I said this at the very beginning, I talk about Ohio State or Oregon being erratic. If you looked at the stats and if you just watch the highlights, it's not indicative of that. But like when you go and you watch them play on tape, it just feels really messy. Like it feels like there's just like not a ton of chemistry, and like not everything's like clicking to the degree that you would hope. And it kind of makes sense why they were so slow to start the season. I think that there was one play where Dylan Gabriel rolls out, looks like he's a wide open receiver, and he gets picked off. Like plays like that in a goal to go situation, plays like that kind of play into what we're talking about here. They looked like they blew out Michigan State, but at the same time, when we rewatched the game, it wasn't really as smooth of a blowout as one would have thought. I think there's a lot of things that are going to be exposed for both of these teams depending on who wins it.
All right, Elks in the super chat with a $2 super chat says, Joe is a Will Howard hater. We know this.
Yeah, okay. So just because I'm critical, actually, I'm not even really being critical of him. I'm just being realistic. Like, he's not a Heisman finalist. He's not going to be a Heisman finalist. He has been a good football player for you. But this whole thing that we had during the offseason where some people were painting him to be a first-round draft pick, to be a Heisman finalist, those things I didn't see. And that's what we've seen at this point. He's played good football. He's also made bad decisions against bad teams and one slightly above average team. We're going to, if he plays really well against Oregon, I'm willing to change my tune. Okay. I'm very willing to change my tune and for my perspective to change on him. But what I've seen so far is reflective of what I saw from him against when he was at Kansas State. He hasn't been as clean as everybody likes to paint him out to be. And again, a lot of people who do shows agree with me on that.
I don't care about what they think because I like there comes a point.
I do if people share the same opinion with me, and if I'm evaluating that, and I'm not
you're using them.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
To pad what you're thinking.
If you're the only person if you're the only person saying something, it usually means that you're wrong.
Like Texas A&M beat Mizzou last week when I was telling everybody, and I was one of the only people that picked Texas A&M to win. You mean like that? All I'm saying is that how can a guy against a good defense go out there and get 5 total touchdowns? By the way,
like he threw for 400 yards and was like unblemished. He had an interception and there's a number
80% passing, bud.
He had 25 passing attempts. You're acting like he had some world beater game. He played a good game, but he also had a pick and he had a couple risky throws that he had that were incompletions and a couple that he were bailed out on.
You take him at Notre Dame and what he's doing right now.
Absolutely, but that's not that has nothing to do with the conversation we're having.
That's
No, that has nothing to do. I hate when you do this, that you bring up Notre Dame. It has nothing to do with the conversation that we're having.